Thank you so much for hosting me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And such an uplifting spiritual service, so thank you for that as well. As you must have guessed from my name and from my bio, that I am visiting from Israel. And I just spent the past week in Dallas, first of all, at the Hillel International Conference. And before that, a few days in Southern California. And it really is beautiful down there. But for me, it was also a bit challenging. And I'll share a little bit about why that is. So first of all, because I've always said about Israel that we may have a lot of problems, but at least we have the weather. And then I go to places like here in Southern California, and the weather is even better. And our troubles are far away. But nonetheless, for me, Israel is home. And it has been home since my parents moved there for me to be born a Sabra, an Israeli born. And having made Aliyah 3 times, immigrated to Israel 3 times in my own lifetime, twice as a child and once as an adult with my husband and 3 kids, I've chosen it over and over again as my home. But the other thing that was hard for me in Southern California was actually to see so many homeless in the streets, in the parks, and the beaches, a challenge that I know that you all have been facing for quite some time. And it might have been my homesickness for my own kids, but it got me thinking about the concept of home and homelessness on a physical as well as a spiritual level. Now, granted, I don't compare actual homelessness with metaphorical homelessness, but it triggered me nonetheless. And I too am feeling rather homeless lately. I lost my political home in the recent elections in Israel. The party I used to vote for has disappeared. And I lost my religious home in the pandemic. The chavurah, the congregation that I used to lead in my community, has never fully recovered from COVID. So although I have a beautiful physical home in the small town of Tel Mond, which is on the outskirts of Netanya, you're all welcome to visit anytime you find yourselves on the road between Haifa and Tel Aviv. The overall sense for me, and others like me right now in Israel, is that we have become a bit homeless in our own homeland. We don't feel quite as welcome in our own home anymore. And then I get into my rental car and start driving north, and I catch a piece on NPR saying that the city workers of San Diego that care for and serve the homeless are themselves struggling with housing. They're underpaid and undersupported. And I empathized with that as well. We at Hillel Israel, the organization that I lead, which is the Israeli arm of the international Hillel movement, we're the ones on college campuses in Israel raising the flag of Jewish pluralism and Jewish peoplehood, advocating for diversity of Jewish life and a stronger connection and commitment to Jews around the world. We're the ones who are serving the Jewishly homeless, quote unquote, if you will, in Israel. Those of us who often don't feel that the Judaism prevalent in the public discourse in Israel today reflects our Judaism. Those of us that are seeking a home for our Jewish values of pluralism, democracy, liberalism, justice, and are not easily finding it. As a servant of these types of homeless, I too am struggling with housing. We too are undersupported by our government, by our people, both in Israel and often here in the United States too, the second largest Jewish community in the world. In this week's Parsha, Parashat Vayeshev, which is my youngest daughter's bat mitzvah parasha, the drama of Yosef and his family develops. As we just heard from the Rabbi, Yosef too is rendered homeless by his brothers in this Torah portion. He's thrown into a pit, sold to the Midianites, and taken to Egypt. We're at the stage in the story where Yosef has averted the worst. He was not killed by his brothers, as they originally intended to do. Reuven convinces them, if you recall, only to throw him into the pit and not actually kill him. But dark times are ahead of him, as there are for us as well. We read that when Yaakov is shown Yosef's bloody robe, the technicolor coat, color coat, he mourns deeply And the text uses the most powerful words to describe his grief. Vayima'en litnachem, which is Hebrew for Yaakov refuses to be comforted. Vayima'en litnachem. He refuses to push through those stages of grief towards consolation because he refuses to give up hope that Yosef may be found. In the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Jews are the people who refuse to be comforted because they never gave up hope. Jacob did eventually see Joseph again. Rachel's children did indeed return to the land, and Jerusalem is once again the Jewish home. And all the evidence may suggest otherwise. It may seem to signify irretrievable loss, a decree of history that cannot be overturned, a fate that must be accepted, but yet Jews never believed the evidence because they had something else to set against it. A faith, a trust, an unbearable hope, an unbreakable hope that proves stronger than historical inevitability. It is not too much to say that Jewish survival was sustained in that hope. And that hope came from a simple, or maybe not so simple, phrase in the life of Yaakov, Vayima'en litnachem. He refused to be comforted. And so while we live in a world still scarred by violence, poverty, and injustice, and I might add, homelessness, we must continue to have hope for change, for peace, for justice, and for tikkun, and for going home. So I stand here today representing the homeless as well as the ones fighting for our home, themselves struggling with housing, asking of you, our brothers and sisters on the opposite side of the ocean here in the United States, please don't give up hope for our collective Jewish home. Israel is still the home of the Jewish people, and you are our allies, our family, our mishpacha. Please join me on the path, which means, of course, the pathway home, habaita, and the path, P-A-T-H, the people assisting the homeless, by continuing to advocate for Israel, to support Israelis fighting for the Israel that we know and love, continuing to visit us and work with us on bringing about change. As Hanukkah begins this week, we remember it is only after the darkest days does the light begin to seep through. We place our menorahs on windowsills and door frames to spread the miracle, but also to remind ourselves to look at our symbols of Jewish identity from the outside as well as from the inside. The outside referring to our political, communal, public Jewish identity, and the inside referring to our personal, spiritual source of inspiration and hope that we share as a family and as a people. After all, the real miracle of Hanukkah is not the 8 days of oil, and it's not the few against the many, but rather the fact that we are still here, thousands of years later, lighting the candles together, and like Yaakov before us, not giving up hope. Toda rabba, Shabbat shalom, v'chag sameach.